Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the new character reviews of 4.5, aka the absolute peak of the worst of Star Rail's balancing quirks that's been going on for a while. Both of these characters are ridiculous in their own very special way that makes me question, do the devs themselves even know what they're doing at this point? You may hear outlandish takes in this video such as this unit is unskippable, the elation path is an utter failure, and even very basic ones such as the balancing of this game is cooked. Hopefully you entertain these ideas, and without further ado, let's go. First unit we have is Robin Summereto. For the purposes of comedy, she is now Roberto. Roberto is a remembrance character, and wow, does this path never have any duds after Aglaya. Roberto works pretty similar to Mortenox's Blade. She has a resource mechanic called Vibes, which increases when the characters attack or receive healing and shielding once per turn. When Roberto reaches 12 stacks, she enters Fever Time. She doesn't get her turn anymore, and there's a 140 speed timer, similar to Blade. When the timer takes a turn, vibes get cut in half with a minimum of 12 vibes, until Roberto doesn't have 12 vibes anymore and the fever time expires. Her skill summons the Memo Sprite or heals it and gives her 6 vibes. Pretty basic. Her ult will advance one character by 100%, regenerate their energy by 20%, and then allow this character to stack vibes faster for 2 turns. Her summon will periodically attack based on Roberto's max HP. Of course, we haven't gotten to the best part yet. She has buffs during Fever Time, and I mean really strong buffs. First of all, while Fever Time is up, you get a near unconditional 16% vulnerability, which, okay, is a pretty nice tiny buff. But second of all, if a party member's attack is higher than Roberto's and they gain vibes, they will gain a strong attack buff equal to the vibes that Robin currently has. Vibes usually hovers around 20 vibes normally, and 40 at its absolute peak. It usually runs dry at the 3rd timer turn, but that assumes the enemy hasn't died yet to what is about to come. First of all, while Fever Time is up, you get a near unconditional 16% vulnerability. Second of all, if a party member's attack is higher than Roberto's attack and they gain vibes, so just by attacking or getting healed, they will gain a strong attack buff equal to vibe. If you want a comparison, Cerebra only gives around 960 attack, and Sunday gives 0% attack. This is by far the strongest attack buffer in the game, considering the next highest attack buffer is Kafka, who has caveats to her attack buff. But wait, isn't Roberto an HP scaler? Yes, she is. And because of that, she has a failsafe for her attack buff. If your attack is lower than Roberto's, you will instead gain a crit damage buff based on vibes. At 20 stacks, that's 70% crit damage, and at 40 stacks of vibes, it's 100% crit damage. Sparkle, for one target depending on your build, is around 96% crit damage. He also has a defense ignore debuff for the entire team. I'm just gonna put it on screen and you can make the judgment for yourself if this is good or not. Putting it all together and comparing Roberto to Mortenox's Blade, you can see that she is incredibly strong, and without the restriction of a healer, she ends up being much more flexible. Actually, let's talk about that even further. Why does Robin have more flexibility than any other 4.x character we've seen? First of all, Robin is an attack buffer that can change to be a crit damage buffer. This is important, because outside of break, everyone wants either crit damage or attack. Mono Rem? Check. Follow-up attack? Check. Himiko Nova? Check. Saber Mesh? Check. With how strong Roberto's buffs are, even specialists like Ashvale and Evernight are fighting in raw amp because of how many key modifiers Roberto hits. Let's talk about Cyrene. Cyrene is a good character, but outside of Mono Rem, she has been a weird E0 character since everyone else has weaker vertical investment and new teammates weren't real. Cyrene was basically in cryo freeze during the entirety of 4.x, and the lack of usage of modern supports like Mortenox's Blade and Welt really stung her usage. The only way out of this was E2 Cyrene, which most people were pretty turned off by. Robin solves this. Robin is more flexible than any of the 4.x units by actually working with Cyrene. And if you're working with Cyrene, you're working with most of the 3.x roster. Robin's benefits are cutting Cyrene's downtime, and Cyrene ping-ponging energy to Robin will probably just make the enemies die before vibes even gets to be cut in half into 20. Let's talk about Finon. Finon's mechanic allows him to kick out Roberto's timer, making it so that Finon with enough setup can actually get 40 vibes much longer than other units. If you use Cyrene, you will be stuck at 50 vibes the entire time. Again, note you can use Cyrene with Roberto because because Roberto is a remembrance character. And because Finon is not a character with a lot of defense shred, there's no fear with overcapping this stat. And again, Cyrene gets the ult faster, which is just about as perfect of a synergy as you can get for a Finon and Cyrene team. Let's loop back to Elation. Roberto's buffs are so high and generic that she's one of the best sustainless and sustain options and can replace EMC. Even taking sustainless out of the picture for Elation, in general with a sustain, Robin with either Huohuo or Hyacinth should be able to make even the slowest teams able to have good uptime because of her trace. And because of Robin's trace that makes sustains actually useful for her stacking, the performance gap between sustainless and a sustain team is much smaller than what other supports have to deal with. There's synergy in her kit to where her numbers with a sustain is one of the best, if not the best, depending on the team. You can try to be really insane and run Roberto with DOT and Break. I'm not joking, this actually works somehow. Break has been having such a identity crisis that using Tribi just for the E1 amp and the advance from DDD is actually worth it in low cycling. Robin and her E1 is even more insane than Tribi E1's amp. This is because the stats justify it over the actual synergy of Fugue. She can work with Acheron because the numbers justify it over the actual synergy. For everyone else that scales off attack before Amphorius, so 2.x units, she's the best because the numbers justify it over the actual synergy. I hope you're starting to get my point here. Roberto is a very flexible unit at base, even more so than characters like Mortenox Blade. And because her numbers are so high, she can still work everywhere else she doesn't reasonably fit in. She truly is a top 3 support at her worst, and otherwise she's just the best because her stats are ridiculous and work everywhere. You might think this isn't the case because of her vibes mechanic restricting her team building, but again, even at her worst, she still provides more stats than 3.x units. Even outliers like Evernight and specialists like Ceridra are really close in raw buff. This is a ridiculous unit, how else can I say this? Now, I'm not gonna pretend this is a new concept. You already know this is the channel that talked about the wheelchair meta, so I don't need to explain it. Just watch that video. The main difference with Tribi and Roberto is that there is practically no counter that exists, at least for now. From the very start, Tribi was dead on arrival for anything mostly single target, especially without her E1. The lack of power and lower targets was an intentional limitation to Tribi's strength and generic nature. In Robin's case, you can argue that its attack frequency being her team building limitation. Right? Well, sorta. The team that struggles the most in stacking is Hyper Carry. The Hyper Carry team that comes to mind immediately that doesn't have many attacks is, well, Green Hyper Carry. Well, this team is such a gimmick that it already is a baseline sustainless team, and the fact that Green's damage comes in waves makes it really easy to plan Robin's mechanic. Okay then, I guess Archer is a bad synergy for Robin? Well, no, he has 5 arrows and 2 follow-up attacks, his attack frequency is fine. Gilgamesh already uses Huohuo, which helps Robin's energy, so that's fine. Himiko attacks a lot, and even if you can't use Huohuo, you can use Hyacinth and it ends up being fine. After this, the only characters left that have problems with uptime are so bad that they wouldn't be able to do much anyway with any other option. Jingyuan? Yeah, Roberto is the highest stat he can get even with the uptime completely lobotomized. Imbibitor Lune? Yeah. Argenti? Yeah. Dr. Ratio? Yeah. Mortenox Blade with Roberto and Hyacinth or Huohuo is really strong. It's a self-sustaining team with damage, safety, well, not too much on Huohuo, and buffs that the 4th party member doesn't even matter at this point. In fact, why don't you just add a support to make Mortenox Blade the main DPS instead of a deadweight DPS from 2.x? Actually, if that support is Cypher specifically, just liquidate it into Robin's E1 and you already have 2 kits in 1 slot, because this character is imbalanced with other imbalanced characters. Let's talk about Roberto being a must-pull and her actual meta impact. The addition of Robin Summereto to the roster doesn't actually change anybody's place in the meta. Saber Mesh is still not any better than Ashblade or Himiko. Anoxa is still not going to be beating teams he wasn't already beating all of a sudden. Cyrene gets an upgrade, but she was in Cryo Freeze that her value really doesn't change. Aglaya got better, but she's still worse than anyone she wasn't beating before this. What will undoubtedly change is how characters around Robin are suddenly more questionable to pick up because Roberto is an account booster in every situation. You will never run into a situation where you can't use Robin, because everyone that is good and not so good really likes her or straight up the best in slot, and we have 3-team content now which makes her almost inescapable. Now don't take this as a complaint because this isn't all bad. While Anoxa and others aren't going to be beating all of the top tiers all of a sudden, at least they'll have an easier time to clear because Robin is a big enough upgrade, which is a good thing. It would be ashamed if the HP rised again to where everyone is still the same performance-wise in like one patch or so, right guys? This is why I consider Robin a must-pull. In nearly every account, she can be used with a team you've already pulled, and unlike Himiko Nova, she will be used more because she's a support. Will you be bricked if you don't pull Robin Summereto? No. Will content seem unbalanced or really annoying if you skip her? Probably. HP inflation is back on Robin's release, so don't be complacent. Her increase will be felt. This is the first time I'm going to absolutely recommend anybody that is watching this video to pull a unit. There hasn't been a unit that has so few weaknesses and so many use cases in a very long time. Even Tribi wasn't this universal. I struggle to think why you won't pull her at all if you pull for any semblance of meta. There are edge cases for sure, but for this unit, I think it's so few that it doesn't even matter. In my opinion, and you know that I don't take the label of must pull very lightly, I think Robin Summereto is the closest a unit in HSR has ever gotten to a must pull status. Since Robin is a support, it's kinda straightforward and very similar to Tribi on how you invest in her. A lot of what makes Robin a bit more complicated to invest in is vertical investment in relation to other vertical investments. For example, if you're focusing on an E2 merchant main DPS, getting Finon or Himiko's E2 is a bigger power spike than any of Robin's eidolons. But again, note that Robin is an account booster, and upgrading either Finon or Himiko only upgrades their one respective team, where Robin upgrades your entire account at a smaller increase. Regardless, Robin's E1 is just Cypher. I'm not joking, Cypher's entire ult but somehow better is packed into her E1. The reason why it's better is it only clears half of the damage tally. Since Roberto's birds are quite fast, you'll usually see around 3 procs of this in a low cycle environment, which actually results in a 22% damage increase. Which sounds mid in comparison to other investments you can make, but because it's like Tribi's E1, the damage being focused on a single target is absurdly strong in AoE fights with one big boss. Karakabaz notably, who has high damage reduction, and obviously Pure Fiction becomes an instant win. Just like Tribi, it also works with overkill damage, making a lot higher in practice. Next investment would be E2. E2 is huge, to put it lightly. I would say this is just a tier below the E2 merchant main DPS eidolons. There's a res pen and also an extra effect allowing faster stacking, which should allow you to cap vibes easier. And because of the cap increase, the stats you get from vibes also increases. It's a very big buff. Robin's signature is okay. Do note that Remembrance really sucks at free-to-play light cones. Pulling Sig isn't really recommended either way. Robin only scales off of her max HP in her gameplay, and of course speed breakpoints are a thing. Therefore, you can use the her to shop LC if the speed requirement is tight, or you can use an off-path high base HP LC like Bailu if you have the build for it. It's not that her Sig is bad, by the way, but it's like Tribi where you see that E1 and E2 and everything else is less valuable in comparison. Note that Robin's technique advances her, so speed building isn't really that difficult for her. So that's it for Roberto's investment. I don't think I can make a Roberto team investment chart because that would encase the entire roster, and I don't think I can do that in one video without being put terribly out of content. Like I said, Robin is an account booster like Tribi, meaning pulling her eidolons won't be the singular best increase usually, especially with newer DPS eidolons being so loaded. But it makes up for itself by the entire account being able to use Robin's eidolons well, despite their lower value for a singular team. She's a flexible third slot and an RMC upgrade. What more could you ask for? That's like the best compliment ever. Next is Aventurine waveflair, the man who has ruined my YouTube searchability forever. This guy is abbreviated to Waven, which is way too close to my name. I don't know if this is targeted hate, but let's get into his kit before I go any longer with my conspiracy theories. Aventurine is an elation unit that, guess what? For once in the path's entire lifespan, isn't completely stuck to mono elation and is actually meta outside of it. Waveflair gains more elation the more speed he has, but that's not interesting. What is interesting is that Waven's entire kit kinda revolves around one trace. The trace gives Aventurine a huge amount of elation stats if he's not the only elation party member. If he is the only elation party member, Waven's elation skill is considered a follow-up attack and gets all of those juicy follow-up attack buffs from Ashvale. Additionally, a teammate attack will give 2 certified banger, 1 punchline, and increase the AHA speed by 25 until AHA takes a turn like Gilgamesh. Which means the amount of AHA skills you're going to see with Aventurine even at E0 in a follow-up attack team is absolutely ridiculous. His talent extends all of his certified banger buffs by 1 turn. When a teammate uses an attack, waveflair gains 1 fervor and 1 punchline with fervor capped at 30. When waveflair reaches 10 fervor, he will do a weaker elation skill with 20 fixed punchline. And the next time AHA takes their turn, Waven's next elation skill is enhanced to consume all fervor and deal more damage the more fervor you have. Both elation skills are balanced and the multipliers are insanely high. Aventurine's skill and ultimate are also AoE and gain some fervor. His trace also gives crit damage to everyone that attacks and basically stacks an extra 12 fervor after every ult use. That's it. He's a pretty simple character. You use him with characters that have a lot of attacks, he does his elation skill, and he hits hard. Pretty simple character. There's not a lot of maximizing for him to do. If you want a comparison to his multipliers, Waveflair's weaker elation skill deals a total of 240% elation in a single target scenario. Sparksy's is 550% elation. But Waveflair's stronger elation skill, which happens a lot, deals 60% to AoE, then 180% split into 10 bounce hits, and 21% for each point of fervor. If you're at, let's say, a conservative value like 20 fervor, that's 660% elation in his strong elation skill. That is a lot, especially considering Aventurine also buffs the team a lot harder and is fast as hell. Because of his multipliers, he is a pretty ridiculous character for very bad reasons. Considering Aventurine is competing with the E1 Triby slot and the E0 Robin slot in an Ashblade team, he's actually doing pretty good as an E0 character. What makes Aventurine a really big upgrade though are his eidolons. And both of them are at E1 and E2, which is pretty cheap in the modern Star Rail environment. I want this to be very clear. Aventurine is a good character and he's a firm destined slot in the mono male Ashblade team. His entire beta cycle was an insane redemption arc to get to that point. You will not be disappointed with the mono male team because it is really strong and the best team in the game when you consider how low the cost is. However, there was a side effect to this once Aventurine started dipping into higher investment after E0, particularly in his elation team. Aventurine's E1 allows him to spam his weaker elation skill a lot, and E2 makes him spam it harder. That's all it does, and this has destroyed mono elation's balancing hilariously. Aventurine is now the best DPS when you involve any sort of eidolon compared to any other damage-oriented elation character in mono elation. I say damage-oriented because not only is he the best cost for cost as a main DPS, he is also a better sub-DPS than Sparksy at equal cost. It is absolutely insane he was able to do this. For Evanesia, it seems like both of them are pretty equal. The only real big difference would be the stage debuff, so if there's D-power then Evanesia starts to feel a lot worse. Silverwolf999, he's either her best sub-DPS or he's outright better because he is not reliant on shield at all and his numbers are just higher with less effort. Sparksy, yeah, let's not even talk about her. I guess the devs forgot the memo that Aventurine's crit damage buff works for elation too. Don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot more pressing issues with elation's balancing, namely the fact that they refuse to release another support and forcing them into a Yaoguang monopoly with 4 viable main DPSs. This is a Tom and Jerry type scheduling. I'm also not against Waven being the best in slot for mono men, since that is a pretty cool team comp and frankly very free to play friendly. But Waven being able to do both as the best in slot is classic Star Rail balancing. Again, just like Robin, I think Waven is another example of Star Rail's balancing philosophy. We don't care about synergies, only the numbers matter in the end. Waveflair is a much more isolated case than Robin though, because he reasonably affects only 2 teams, and he's the DPS so he's much more limited with what he can do. I'm gonna stop myself and just give you a TLDR. Waveflair is objectively the strongest elation DPS, because for 1, he doesn't have to use Yaoguang, and unlike Yaoguang, he doesn't have to use elation. And for 2, his numbers are the highest if the team does have Yaoguang and any eidolon involved. And for 3, he doesn't rely on shield like a certain emanator. And lastly, his eidolons are just as good, if not better than the other elation DPSs. Wow, I love HSR balancing. At the very least, Aventurine wasn't bad balancing at E0, it's just E1 that's the problem. So how do you pull Waveflair? Aventurine is interesting, to say the least. First of all, waveflair's E1 and E2 are the best damage increases for any one of his teams. It cannot be overstated how many attacks he can do at E2. You spam it, and it's a lot of damage. It's really funny to look at. His signature is okay, but elation battle pass LCs are good enough honestly that you don't have to necessarily pull for it. He's also still really good at E1S1, so don't worry if you can't reach E2 yet. His teammate situation is very interesting. Ashvale is more important for Aventurine. Ashvale's crit damage buff and constant defense shred are very important, along with his higher attack frequency. Mortinox Blade is less important, but he's still really good in the team though. He is the best in slot. He has decent personal DPS and has some amp of his own with okay attack frequency. It especially helps that Blade is tanky for sustainless because Ashvale needs all the help that he can get. But tada, what a surprise, Roberto works really well with Aventurine kicking out Mortinox Blade, because Robin has more synergistic stats than Mortinox Blade. It's not that bad though. The damage difference of Aventurine's team with Mortinox Blade compared to Robin Summereto should be like very minimal. If you already have Mortinox Blade, I would pull Roberto not to replace Blade, but rather for the reasons earlier that she's just a general account buff. If you don't have Mortinox Blade, obviously Roberto is the best that you can get for now. So that's it. Aventurine is broken. I don't know what else to say. He's a DPS for two of the best teams in the game, and his verticals are actually good. He's, you know, pretty straightforward. At least Aventurine will feed Archer mains some more quantum weakness bosses until the heat death of the universe. Thank you, Aventurine. Anyway, that's it for this video. Like, comment, do all the algorithm stuff. I'm interested to see in comments where you can justify that Robin is lower value, because honestly, I just can't figure out one. Really, like, it's all just edge cases that I don't think apply to most people. Anyway, I'll see y'all next time. Bye bye.